Learning to code with GitHub Codespaces. Just what is ChatGPT doing anyway? Some great open source projects, and a pick of the week that proves that you can play Doom on anything. All that and more on this episode of The Download. Welcome back to another episode of The Download. I'm your host, Christina Warren, Senior Developer Advocate at GitHub, and this is the show where we cover the latest developer news and open source projects. Please like and subscribe. And so my shirt this week is from GitHub, but so is my beanie, and I'm wearing a beanie because it's like 30 degrees Fahrenheit in Seattle. That's like -1 degrees in Celsius. So yeah, it's cold, hence the hat. But you know what isn't cold? All the cool news that we've got to talk about. That was terrible. Okay. First up, let's talk about a fantastic blog post from my girl, Roselle Scarlett, titled A Beginner's Guide to Learning to Code with GitHub Codespaces. Now, this blog post is fantastic. Roselle goes into tons of detail about how you can use GitHub Codespaces in your journey to learning to code. And GitHub Codespaces, if you're not familiar, are a way to have a fully configured development environment in the cloud that you can access from a web browser or inside your favorite IDE. And it's a great way to take on a really big project. We even use it internally when we're building GitHub. But it's also fantastic for beginners because you can use a Codespace to get started with a tutorial without having to worry about how to configure your machine, or even if your machine is powerful enough to run the tutorial. And you can even use Codespaces on an iPad or a Chromebook, so it's really, really great for beginners of all stripes. Roselle's post is fantastic. I've got a link to it in the show notes and the description down below. Next up, I also wanted to call attention to another blog post that our team posted about an incident that happened on January 30th. So on January 30th, GitHub deployed a change that slightly altered the compression settings on source code downloads. However, this change has some unforeseen consequences for a number of communities, and after they let us know, we rolled the change back. Well, in his blog post, Matt Cooper does a really great job with a postmortem explaining what happened and what measures we'll be taking in the future to prevent further surprises, because we don't want people to be surprised, and how future changes will be handled. My thanks to Matt for the blog post and to the whole team who was able to roll back that change, as well as my thanks to our users who were impacted by that change for their patience. We really do appreciate it. Links are in the show notes and the description down below. Moving on to some AI news. We've been talking a lot about AI on this show lately, and most of our focus has been on large language models like GPT-3, which is what is used in things like ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot. But how does all of this stuff actually work? Well, famed computer scientist and researcher Stephen Wolfram wrote a blog post. Although I'm going to be honest, calling it a blog post is doing it a bit of a disservice. It's 20,000 words, and it's more like a small book, but it's called What is ChatGPT Doing and Why Does It Work? I read this last week, and then I read it again earlier this week, and to me, this is one of the best explanations of how these large language models work as anything that I've read or watched. And as I said, this is a long read, but most of it is really approachable, even for beginners, and I think that this is a really great way of getting a better understanding of why these models work the way that they do. Really, really impressive stuff, although I would expect no less from Mr. Wolfram, and I've got it linked down below. Speaking of learning from the best, I saw this GitHub repo shared all over my feeds this week, and I just kind of wanted to add my own +1 to it as well. All right, so do you know your open source history? If you do, you might know that Linux, the operating system and kernel, was greatly influenced by a project called MINIX, or Mini-Unix. And that was designed to teach students how to build operating systems and how they work. And one of those students was a Finnish student named Linus Torvalds, and he built his own system called Linux, and well, history was made. Books that reference MINIX are still being used, but as the author of this repo that I've got linked found, getting MINIX 3 to actually build and compile is kind of complicated. And thus, we have a new repo called MINIX from Scratch, and it's from student Oysen O'Connell, who has outlined how to compile that code that's referenced in the book, Operating Systems Design and Implementation, Volume 3E, and he notes this in the README. It was tricky to get a reasonable development setup to make it possible for newbies like myself to learn from the book, and this is an attempt to fix that and make it easy to browse, edit, recompile, and execute the code. Fantastic work, Oysen. Also, I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I did my best. There are lots of reasons it makes sense to study something like MINIX rather than jumping straight into Linux, especially for beginners. I love that this repo is here to help more people learn. Great work. I've got a link to the repo in the show notes and the description. Speaking of great work, now it's time for our GitHub project spotlight, where I highlight a project from the community that I've run across. And this one is called NoteSH, and it's a fully functional sticky notes app that you can run in your terminal. And it's from GitHub user C. Vaniak, and it was built using Textual, which is a TUI library that we've talked about before. And the idea is that you can have a functional sticky notes app that works with Vim key bindings in your terminal that you can easily access at any time. It's pretty neat. I'm really impressed with the functionality of the app, and it's a really great example, I think, of the sorts of stuff that you can do with Textual. So great work. I've got a link to the project and the repo in the show notes and the description down below. Really fun. And now it's time for my pick of the week. All right, so one of the longest standing memes on the internet is that Doom will run on anything. But can it play Doom is not so much a question anymore as a dare. Still, I don't think that I ever expected to see Doom running on a Lego brick. Yet that's exactly what maker and graphics engineer at What a Workshop, James Brown, has been able to do. So for the last few months, Brown has been documenting his process on YouTube of getting programmable OLED displays running on plastic Lego bricks. And now he's managed to do it wirelessly and using an accelerometer for tilt control, meaning that he can even control the game too. So he's basically hidden a controller inside these bricks that he can then move around and run Doom on a Lego brick. It's incredible. You've got to check out James's work. I've got it linked down below. This is beyond cool. It's just, my mind is blown. What's the next thing that you would like to see someone put Doom on? Let me know in the comments down below, and let me know your thoughts on any of our other stories. Well, that's going to do it for me. If you liked this episode, please give us a like on YouTube. It really helps us out. And subscribe to the GitHub YouTube channel for all your nerd needs. See you next time.